Hey guys, welcome back to Fantasy Tipped. Julian here for another exciting episode. This one about players that I'm suggesting you draft in your upcoming fantasy drafts because they are good value at their ADP. Before I dive into the list of players, drop a like and hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. And if you haven't heard, we're trying to hit 8,000 subscribers before the season starts. So definitely, if you haven't already and you've been watching my content, hit that subscribe button and I really appreciate it. If you do want to take that support to the next level, hit the join button on Patreon or on YouTube and you get access to plenty of perks like my draft rankings. All right, let's jump into the content now. And for you guys, I have 4 centers, 4 wingers, 4 defensemen, and 4 goalies. Let's start with Mika Zibanejad. And last year you had to use a second or third round pick in order to get Zibanejad. Suddenly, you can get him in the 7th round. He's very, very easily a top 50 player in fantasy and could even be a top 25 player when all is said and done this year on a very strong New York Rangers team with the league's best power play. Absolutely good value. The next guy is John Tavares, and he is incredibly consistent and one of the most reliable players you can draft in fantasy. Even on a down year last year, he got like 65 points, which is fantastic. I have him ranked as the 27th best forward in the draft. And the fact that you can get him this late at almost an ADP of 100 is absolutely crazy and mouthwatering. Next, I have Elias Lindholm. Listen, if Pavel Zacha can jump over 20 points to net almost 60 total points after joining the Bruins, a much better player and Elias Lindholm, who has scored 78 points or more twice in his career, will definitely bounce back from an off season last year where he only netted 44 points. Yes, you might think he's been around a little while, but he's actually only 29 years old, so he shouldn't be on the decline just yet. I have him ranked around the 100th best fantasy player this year, so getting him at 135 is pretty good value. And quite frankly, players always seem to excel in Boston, so I could see him doing even better than that. My final center for you guys is Brock Nelson, going at an ADP of 158.8. He has been one of the most consistent fantasy players in recent years. He has scored 30 goals in 3 consecutive seasons and is super, super underrated every single year in fantasy. I have him ranked as the 78th best player this year, and getting him at this ADP, which is like double, is an absolute steal. I strongly suggest grabbing Brock Nelson if he falls this late. First on the list is Jordan Kyrou, going at an ADP of 128.4. He ended the season really, really hot with 20 points in March and April combined. If he can build on that momentum from the end of the season, his ceiling is super high and he could very easily score 30 plus goals again this year and finish within the top 75 players. And with his center and right wing eligibility, that's just great value right there at his ADP. For the next guy, I've talked about Jack Quinn in other videos, but another Sabre to look out for is JJ Peterka. He scored 28 goals last year, was the second best on Buffalo, and almost all of his points last year were 5-on-5. Now, he was moved up to the top 6 and the top power play in the second half of the season, and he's expected to resume that spot this year with no Skinner and Middlestat in the Buffalo Sabres lineup, and I'm expecting him to be even better. Now, what's really exciting is the final 10 games of the season, we saw him shooting at an average of 3.9 shots per game. Over the course of the season, the average was 2.76, but 3.9 in the last 10 games shows what is to come with Peterka. With all that being said, I could easily see him scoring 32 goals this year, along with 30 assists, and that kind of upside makes him a fringe top 100 player. But obviously, his ceiling is even higher than that if he really brings it this year, and he has so much potential. Getting him at an ADP of 164.3 could end up being a real steal. The next guy on this list is Boone Jenner, and if you're in a categories league or a league where a lot of different categories count as points, Boone Jenner is kind of an absolute juggernaut and is really, really valuable for you. He shoots a lot, he hits a lot, he even blocks quite a bit of shots for a forward, and he wins a lot of faceoffs if you have that in your league. I have him ranked at 130 due to his injury history, but if he can stay healthy, He's easily a top 100 fantasy player due to both his production and his countless peripherals. Not to mention his almost certain spot in Columbus's top 6 and power play unit. The points should definitely be coming as well. It's a very big steal at his current ADP. And my final winger for you guys is Taylor Hall. Now, if he even has the slightest semblance of his form of old, he hits this current ADP guaranteed. He's going so late in drafts, literally like last pick of the draft, ADP 191. We all know the ceiling that Taylor Hall has. Not to mention he's probably playing with Bedard and probably playing on that top power play with Bedard as well. We could actually see a real bounce back campaign from him, and there's virtually no risk throwing your last pick of the draft at a guy like Taylor Hall. And the first defenseman on my list, guys, is Mackenzie Weegar, or as I like to call him, the Wee Goat. And I have him being the number 7 fantasy defenseman this year. And you can get him in the 7th to 8th round this year. That is really, really good value. He just puts up some incredible peripherals, guys. Expect plenty of shots, hits, and blocks, and expect a good amount of production too. Towards the end of the season last year, he was being used for basically the first time in his career on the top power play in Calgary. If he can keep that spot as well, oh boy, does this guy ever have a lot of value. I love Mackenzie Weegar this year, and I think that he's going to have another excellent fantasy season. Next is John Carlson, going at an ADP of 112.6. Now, Washington as a team was abysmal last year. As a team, they had the 5th fewest amount of goals per game. They just couldn't score any goals, and injuries kind of played a big factor there. So naturally, John Carlson did suffer a bit, but still put up a very respectable 52 points last year. This year, I'm expecting the offense to do significantly better in Washington, and Carlson should be able to hit somewhere close to 60 points. You should still see the power play one time in Washington and put up solid shots and blocks peripherals. I have him ranked as my 13th best defenseman in the draft, but he's being drafted right now as the 27th best defenseman. That's some pretty good value. The next guy on this list is Bowen Byram, and I did not have him ranked in my top 50 defenseman video. And no, I still don't have him in my top 50. I actually have him ranked at 51 currently. But now with the mention of a Dahlin injury, Byram could gain some value. Now, I know they said that Dahlin's injury isn't serious, but if Dahlin were to miss any time in the regular season, Byram probably will be manning the power play 1. If that is the case at any point in the season, he could definitely exceed the 35-point season that I had originally projected for him. He's someone you can get pretty late in drafts, and if you are drafting Dahlin, it could be a handcuff for you in case that Dahlin goes down. Definitely not a terrible idea. The other thing to note though with Byram is his injury history. Until last year, he never played more than 42 games in a season. But he did take an encouraging step last year and played 73 games. So maybe the injury concern days are behind him. But I definitely suggest grabbing this guy late in your draft if you did draft Rasmus Dahlin. Then I have Jacob Trouba going at ADP of 167.1. Listen, he's not a very good real-life defenseman. But if he can put up 20 to 30 points along with very solid shots, hits, and blocks peripherals that he normally puts up, he could legitimately be a top 20 fantasy defenseman in leagues that reward peripherals decently or in categories leagues. And taking him this late, there's virtually no risk. Listen, I'm not going to sit here and tell you guys he's a good defenseman. I'm not even going to tell you he's an exciting defenseman, because he's not. His ceiling each and every night is not very high, but the floor is fantastic, and this late in the draft, it's really, really good value. First one I have is Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen, or as we'd like to call him on the channel here, 6K. With Swayman being unsigned, I actually have 6K as my number 10 goalie on the board. He was phenomenal last season once he was given the opportunity, and I'm expecting the same from him this year. The even better thing is, unlike the goalies I have ranked ahead of him, you can get 6K in the 9th round. That's great value for a number 1 goalie on your team. And listen, I know some people are scared of Levi, but I honestly think Levi is going to be in the AHL this year. They signed James Reimer for a reason. I think UPL and Reimer is going to be the goalies of Buffalo, and then Levi is going to be the guy who's in the AHL getting starts over there so that he can improve and be a starter in the future. The next guy is Justus Annunen, going at an ADP of 158.3, and he's going undrafted in the vast majority of leagues. And he'll probably be riding your bench a lot early in the season if you do draft him. However, I expect Georgiev to struggle once again, and that's where Annunen can start getting more and more starts if he plays well like he did last season. If you draft Georgiev, definitely handcuff him by taking Annunen as well. Otherwise, you might be able to get away with not drafting Annunen and scooping him as soon as you see Georgiev starting to struggle. Obviously, guys, I don't suggest drafting Georgiev, especially that early. It's not worth it. Honestly, probably let Annunen go undrafted if you're in a shallower league. And as soon as you see Georgiev not doing well, boom, grab Annunen and you've got yourself potential starter in the NHL. The next guy is Joonas Korpisalo, and he's going at ADP of 173.7, so super late in drafts. And the reason you'd be drafting him is because Swayman remains unsigned, and at this point, it seems like he may not sign until the regular season starts or later, right? So until Swayman signs, Joonas Korpisalo is the starter in Boston. He could be the starter in Boston until December if Swayman holds out that long, and potentially the whole season if Boston doesn't offer Swayman what he wants. You can get this guy super late in drafts, think maybe the last round of your draft, or if you've already had your draft and you drafted Jeremy Swayman, make sure to pick this guy up. That way at least you have Boston starter until Swayman comes back. And finally, Laurent Brossoit doesn't have an ADP and is only 5% rostered in fantasy. Now, I know he has an injury designation, but he should be good to go for the start of the year. At worst, he misses the first week of the season from the timetable that he got. Now, his counterpart, Mrazek, in Chicago, is being drafted very, very early at 113.3, as if Mrazek was going to be the full-time starter over there. But I think it's a lot more likely that Mrazek splits pretty evenly with Brossoit. I mean, for crying out loud, they kept giving Soderblom starts last year, even though he was horrendous, and Mrazek was amazing last year. So listen, if you're desperate for a goalie late in your draft, Brossoit is an option that could see about half the starts on a much improved Chicago team. His career numbers are actually really, really good, but he has always been a backup. So I definitely wouldn't expect more than half the starts here. But if you do need to take a shot in the dark, super late in a super deep draft, go for Brossoit. Or like I've mentioned in other videos, Tarasov or Dostal are very good options as well and also don't have an ADP currently. And that's it for this video, guys. If you enjoyed my content today, drop a like and hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Let me know down in the comments what you liked in this video, what you didn't like, and I'll catch you in the next episode of Fantasy Tipped.